Welcome to Neutral Exposure, a space for reflection and inspiration with photographers across a range of disciplines. My name's Al Simmons.
My old man used to take pictures, when we used to go traveling in the car. So he always had this sort of 35mm SLR that he had with him, and like he wasn't a great photographer, but I guess it was just one of those things that people used to do when back in the day. So it always came with us. It was a Voigtlander, and he always used to take it traveling wherever we went. So I guess after a while, I was like, "Oh, Dad, can I have a go?" And initially, he was like, "Oh no, you can't. Don't touch it. Don't touch it." But as I got a little bit older, like I guess 13 or 14, maybe even a bit younger. He was a bit more, take some pictures, and I didn't really know what I was doing. It was just sort of copying what he did. But eventually, got the film back, weeks later, and he was like, "Oh, these look cool. These look good." And I think that's where I got my sort of interest in photography from. So I guess after a while, I sort of enjoyed it more, and then got some pocket money and bought like a little Ricoh 35mm camera and started using that, and eventually sort of moved up. I think I got my first proper camera was an Olympus OM4, which I kind of bought it and didn't realize it, but like 2 out of every 3 were kind of duds because they had problematic motherboards. So I bought it and then used that for about 3 months before it broke. I moved on to a Nikon system after that, and then set up a darkroom in my parents' laundry. So it was just like a tiny laundry, like 1 by 2.5 meter space, maybe 1.5 meter. And just had a little darkroom 35mm set up with an enlarger and some trays, and used to just print and process black and white film and print black and white pictures from there.
Did you learn all that process from your dad as well?
No, he kind of just took pictures. So I kind of learned all that black and white stuff myself, just going back and reading, like, I think magazines like Popular Photography. There was a great one used to called Camera and Darkroom, an American mag, and I don't think that's around anymore. But yeah, just going to the library, and as I got sort of more in teenage years, going to the newsagent and buying magazines, and just sort of following there, because we didn't really have internet back then. So there was, there wasn't all this plethora of information that we have now. So it was a little bit harder to do. But I mean, there used to be a shop called Van Bar, which was around the corner from my high school, and that was like a photographic supplier. And you go in there, and they used to have like Ilford brochures and all this technical data that you could get to, look up the processing, like how to process FP4 or HP5, and development ratios between, I used to use a Plus developer, and they used to have like different ratios depending on how you want your film to look, or whether you want a bit more contrast and all that kind of stuff. So it was really good fun tinkering in that way.
Nice. And what sort of stuff were you shooting?
Just anything really. Photograph. Just go in the backyard and shoot my brother sometimes. Go out and shoot some birds. Like basically just copying what I would see in magazines, like what I thought was interesting. But there was never really anything specific that I shot. I was more just playing around, and I think the magic was actually taking a photo, because you couldn't see anything instantaneously like you can now, and then coming back, after you've processed the film and printed like a contact sheet, and then you sort of start looking through and you go, "Oh, I remember that shot. That looks cool." But it was always a bit of a surprise to what you actually get, I think, on film. And that was nice. Or you didn't know any better back then.
Sure. So how did that then transition from experimenting in the darkroom, taking snaps, to pursuing it as a profession?
So I started in art. I started doing photography in high school. So I did it for my like studio arts projects, and then sort of decided that I wanted to do photography. And back then I only thought photography was about like commercial photography was shooting weddings or shooting catalogs. I didn't really know that there was, a myriad of different types of photography that you could do. So I finished high school and then I did 2 years of applied photography at a college in Melbourne, and then started assisting a still life photographer. And he was kind of like a old English guy. He was quite well known, and it was a real taskmaster. So I assisted him for a year before he retired, and then sort of did various assisting jobs with all sorts of different people, architecture, commercial, and in Melbourne, people don't really specialize that much. You kind of have to be a little bit general in the type of photography you do. So, you're a bit of a jack of all trades. So I guess, yeah, that's how I kind of got started, just studying and straight into assisting. And I assisted for quite a long time as well. So I think I finished college in 1997 and then, assisted till, all the way up to when I moved to London in 2004, and then still assisted then till about, I guess, 2009, maybe 2010. Yeah. So it was a long road, and it was been a really interesting journey. A lot of different jobs and different experiences. So yeah.
How useful was the course that you did?
I think, in terms of what I do now or how I see commercial photography now, it probably wasn't that relevant. I think we learnt sort of the basics, and photography's obviously changed a lot since then, because back then we were still, we'd just started working on computers and retouching. Like we would have to go down to the graphic arts lab and borrow their computers to do any sort of Photoshop work. And that was, back then I think they were still running on System 9. So it wasn't even OS X back then. So we learned all the basics. We learned there was applied commercial photography was a subject, I think, or applied photography. Then there was like a sciencey kind of part of it. There was some theory, and I guess you learn the basics about as you would like the masters and the history of photography, people who are kind of, I guess, inspirational photographers. But I think in my course, it was, if they had focused more about the business of photography, it might have been better.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed what we learnt there, and made some good friends there. So yeah.
Was it tutors there who put you in touch with the photographers who you went on to assist, or was that just a case of?
No. It's more sort of hustling. Like after I finished the course, at the lab and around all the suppliers, there'd be like ads going up for jobs, and it just so happened that this job had come up for an assistant because his current assistant was leaving. So I went to go and see this photographer. His name was John Street. So I went to go and see him, and took along my portfolio, and it was a pretty crappy portfolio back then, I suppose. And he pretty much ripped it apart, which was pretty depressing at the time, because you kind of put all this effort into making something that you think is nice, and just gets torn apart pretty quickly by anyone in the industry. And he was like a harsh guy anyway.
Well seasoned.
Yeah, exactly, well seasoned. And he kind of nicked off, and I was talking to his assistant at the time, and he was like, "Look, do you really want this job?" Because I think he really wanted out of that job, but it was up to him to find the new assistant.
Okay.
And he's like, "Look, if you really want the job, I'll put in a good word for you, and I'll tell you what to do, and blah blah blah." So yeah, I was really lucky enough to get that gig. So I worked with him for a year before he retired, and kind of packed up his studio. And you can imagine like old school photographers who had a massive studio, loads of lights and cameras and flats and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was no sort of small task packing all that up and sticking into his house after that.
Did you get a chance to take any of the kit if he was retiring?
No, no, not at all, really.
I thought that was going to be like, yeah, it was really well timed assisting this guy who was just about to retire, and actually then he kitted me out with my first studio or whatever.
No, it was really unfortunate actually. He hung on to everything. He mostly shot on a Signar P2. The majority of the stuff we would do for jobs would be either on 5.4 or on a roll film back, and then occasionally we'd shoot stuff on 5x7, a 5x7 change back for the Signar, 8x10 occasionally, and then sometimes he'd whip out this there's an 11x14 back that he had adapted to the Signar. So back then you could still get sheets of 11x14. Not very often. I think he had to import it from America, but like he'd have a couple of boxes of like EPP in the fridge. And so some jobs which I guess had the budget, he'd pull that out, and that was his I guess his unique selling point, where no one else could shoot on this format of camera. So that that was pretty interesting. But no, I didn't get a chance to claim any of his gear. No, which was sad. Like I know like back in the day when he was owing assistants money, occasionally some gear would go missing from his kit. But yeah, I wasn't. No, by the time I started assisting, he had his act together. So I didn't really score any of the goodies.
So then, what transitioned you to taking on your own clients?
Yeah, it took quite a while for me actually. I think I was never really that confident going in to shoot, I guess. So, and I guess the thing for me was I actually quite enjoyed assisting and enjoyed, being a fly on the wall in different people's lives, and just going on all these different shoots. Like one day you'd be shooting corporate portraits, the next day, you're shooting in the studio, and you might be shooting some celebrity, and then the next day you're shooting some architecture. Or I remember one of my first traveling jobs. I was like to the Northern Territory shooting the army, and already that was like that was fascinating. And then the photographer was like, "Oh, do you have a passport?" I was like, "Oh no, not yet." It's like, "Oh, you should get one because you never know when you're going to travel." I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense." And so I ended up getting my passport, and like weeks later, I get a call from this photographer saying, "Oh, look, I've got this job in China shooting a hotel. Are you free?" I was like, I couldn't believe people actually traveled for work. It was just such a foreign idea. So that was really amazing, and I guess having experiences like that really kind of it really didn't push me to shoot. I obviously enjoyed shooting, but it didn't push me to shoot commercially myself for quite a while.
It sounds like you've got quite a strong technical head as well, so I guess that was pretty well suited to
assisting. Yeah. So yeah, I guess because I always liked the technical aspects of photography, and I enjoyed that a lot. So a lot of photographers that I work with, didn't care about that so much. And especially when digital first started to, I guess, get popular, that was probably back in, I guess, 2002, maybe 2000, 2003. Even though we didn't really do that much of it at school, I kind of, I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I guess kind of learned about it a little bit more than, because I guess a lot of photographers were stuck in, shooting film back then. So it was quite a slow transition for people to move from film to digital, and especially when digital cameras at the start were pretty crappy. I remember one job where the guy I was working with, he was way early into digital cameras, and he had bought this 3 megapixel. It was like a Kodak chip built on a Nikon body, and it shot to, I think you shot to a PCM CIA card, and it was like we were shooting a telephone exchange machine, and the file was 3 megapixels. I remember that, and the chip was so small, he had to shoot on like a fisheye, like an 8mm fisheye or 11mm fisheye or something ridiculous like that. So yeah, that was a long time ago. things have moved on. But yeah, I did like the technical aspect of photography. So yeah, and it was also interesting to see different photographers' perspectives on how they worked, and then use that to adapt to my own kind of style and
Style,
work methods. Yeah.
And looking back, do you see that there are any particularly important lessons that you took from those photographers that have really stayed with you?
Yeah, I mean, every photographer's been I guess people that I assisted for any sort of extended period of time had a really big influence on me. But they always came from different backgrounds and shot different things. So the guy I first worked with, he was a still lifer, and so he was really technical with his lighting, very very specific, lens choices, the way he set up his cameras. It was very very disciplined. So there was that. Then the guy I worked with on architectural projects, he kind of taught me how to look at buildings and see, and you can look at buildings and make a lens selection, and he'd always walk around and see where to stand. And at the start, I was always like, what's he doing? Like, why is he walking around? Like, just put the camera down and take a picture. And then after a while, you start to realize that as you move around, object in front of the building moves and changes, and it clears a view to what you're shooting. So I guess that was more about sort of looking and seeing and positioning yourself. And then other photographers have great kind of relationships with their clients, and I think that's really one of the really important things. It's almost, in some respects, like it doesn't really matter how good your photography is. I think photography is really a relationship business. And if you can have a good relationship with your business, people will come back and shoot with you. And of course, everyone wants to be the best photographer that they can be. But if you can achieve, if you're a photographer that can achieve, 85% of what's required, and you're having a really nice time with the client and the client's having a good time, then you're going to get that call back, as opposed to the guy that's giving 95% and being an arsehole to their client. So I feel like that's really important. I guess it's a mix between the two, but if it was up to me, it'd be weighted more towards having a good relationship with clients.
Sure. And when you were pretty heavy, while spending most of your time assisting people, did you have much chance to shoot your own stuff as well? Was that kind of happening gradually alongside?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, I never really felt that comfortable, and I was more when you went on location and there was a bit of downtime where you could go and visit, the local sites where you go and start taking pictures. It was more when we were shooting on location. I think traveling around, airports and planes and stuff, it always offered really interesting views, stuff that you would never see back home, I guess. And at that time, we were doing a lot of traveling. I was working with a car photographer at the time. So we were doing a lot of traveling through Europe and the States, a little bit through Asia. So it was always, it was fascinating to be able to see different parts of the world, and shooting landscapes whilst we were traveling was great.
Cool. It seems, I mean, as someone who's kind of gone on to, shoot still life and cars and design, was it kind of the people that you were assisting gradually kind of shaping the direction you were going in as well? What was it that attracted you to that type of work?
Yeah, certainly would be quite influenced by the people that you're working for at any one time. But I think when you're a bit younger and you haven't really found your voice, you always tend to gravitate towards shooting in the style that the person that you're working for photographs stuff. So yeah, I guess you would just sort of slowly shoot in a similar style to them, but gradually kind of as you move away from there, or you start working with different people, you start photographing things or seeing things in different ways. So then you sort of develop your own style after that. And of course you never want to sort of copy the people that you work for or work with. So that's always sort of plays in the back of your mind as well. But no, I guess just as you take more pictures, you kind of start developing your own style, and you realize things that you like or dislike about your work.
Sure. And then I suppose jumping forward a little bit, what then brought you to London? You know, what was that transition like from working in Australia to working in London?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I used to work for this photographer who was here. He worked in London. This was back in Melbourne, and he had worked in London for I think 9 years or so. He moved back to Melbourne, and I was working with him, and he was always like pushing me to go. Like he goes, "Oh, if you want to do real photography, you have to move to London." So I guess that was my motivation, to travel. So I moved over in 2004 with my girlfriend at the time, and then kind of just prior to, I guess, traveling, just started looking for photographers whose work I like the look of. And, when I moved over, I went to see them, and tried to get some work. And that, was a tough couple of months moving over. But gradually, started assisting guys, in London. And that time was a really transitional time for photography as well, because people were starting to shoot more and more digital. I think sort of 2005, maybe 2006, I think maybe Phase had started. Well, Phase already had their digital backs, but I think they had a H25, maybe P25. So that was like, I guess, the most portable package, which had a screen, which really
quality was starting to rival film.
And people were, I guess, starting to sort of spend that much amount. I guess, I mean, digital backs back then were, I don't know, 20 grand, I guess, which was a lot of money back then. And I think it was that time where people started to really take an interest in digital photography. I think it gained, popularity at that time.
And you said there was a tough couple of months. What was that, other than finding, photographers to assist? What challenges were there in that building of new networks, new opportunities? How long did it take you to kind of find your feet in London? And I suppose be able to make a living to build on that.
Yeah, I guess it probably took 3 to 6 months to start working. And then obviously after that, you kind of start looking for, and obviously you're traveling around Europe at the same time, because that's what everyone does when we move over to London. And it's just, I guess, just trying to build up your contacts and, discovering, like, you had all your suppliers back home, and after you move to London, you kind of have to find new suppliers, new labs. So I was just kind of, discovering what was around. And London during that time, there were loads of labs around. Sort of, I lived in sort of Angel and Old Street area at the time, and I couldn't believe how many labs there were, and labs that were open 24 hours. So it was really sort of amazing time. And I know, like, the 90s and before were even busier times as well. But compared to the amount of labs that you see now, it's changed a lot.
And were there any particularly big breaks or kind of significant points along that road where you kind of started to see your own personal career really coming on?
Yeah, I guess I was out. I used to work with a photographer, and he would handball me small jobs that he couldn't do or didn't want to do. So I started shooting some editorial then, and then I guess my main break was I was out having drinks with a photographer friend and a designer from Wired magazine.
Mm-hmm. And
my photographer friend was like, "Oh, you should try some." And I guess that was when I started shooting a bit more. I guess that was a foray into shooting on a regular basis. That was sort of editorial with Wired magazine. And then that sort of started off, got the ball rolling, I guess, shooting other sorts of editorial, and it was all kind of still life. Because I think at the time I decided that, still life's one of these things where you don't need to depend on other people. You could have a small setup and shoot what you wanted to. I knew at the time I didn't want to do fashion. I guess that was the main thing.
Mm.
And then cars as well was hard, because obviously you need cars and you need
big studio space.
Studio space. Or if you're going on vacation, you need to travel and all that kind of stuff. And England wasn't really suited to much car photography, like outdoor location car photography. So I think, shooting still life was like a easy way in.
Yeah, cool. And there's a certain technicality to still life where, obviously there's a lot of careful control with lighting and things like that. But what really kind of makes an interesting project? In terms
Yeah,
of
I guess
design?
I mean a good example is when I started shooting some stuff for Nike. I had a friend who was a designer there, and they had this project on, and they said that was being shot by like a pack shot factory type of company, and he was like, "Look, we're not happy with these results. Do you want to try?" And I was like, "Yeah, this would be fantastic. It would be brilliant." They said, "Oh, look, we've got I was crazy. I was like 6 pairs of shoes, 4 angles of each, and at the time I was so naive. I was like, oh yeah, I reckon I can do that in a day. Like, how hard can shoe photography be? Like, just chuck a pair of shoes down, it'll be fine."
Yeah.
And I remember it took me like 3 days to shoot. It was so difficult to like get the same angle for each different pair of shoes to line up in camera. Because they all had to sort of match.
What camera were you working with at this point?
At that time, I was shooting on a Hasselblad 503CX with I think we had a P45 by then.
Okay, so it was digital, but you had it wasn't able to kind of pre-visualize what you were shooting as well.
No, yeah. So there was no live view because we were on. I wonder if we were on. I can't remember whether we were still on 3.7.9 of Capture One or whether we'd already transitioned into like version 6 or 7. But yeah, we're on a P45, and it took me 3 days shooting from like 8 a.m. and some nights was like 3 a.m. finish. There were nights. There was a night that I was going to sleep at the studio, and I was so uncomfortable just like trying to sleep on some polyboards. I decided to like go home and then come back the next morning in like 3 hours time. So that was a real sort of learning curve. And then sort of subsequent shoots with Nike, they had sort of different projects and more involved projects, and all the stuff that I was doing was originally kind of for their social. And one project that really kind of sticks in my mind was for Kanye West Yeezys. They were nicknamed the Red Octobers, and we had to be so specific with the lighting because the designer was like, "Oh, look, a lot of people are going to see this shoe," so we had to pick out like every little bit of detail. And these shoes already had all had different surfaces and different textures, so it was really important for them to bring all these out. And it wasn't as easy as like just sticking a light up, because some of the different textures and fabrics had to be lit from slightly different angles in order to bring it out. So there was a lot of work involved in shooting that pair of shoes, and it really kind of gave me a real insight into how important it was to light things well, and but also to make it look natural as well, because it's quite easy to have lights coming from all sorts of different directions. And when you bolt it all together in post, it never looks quite right. So there's definitely a conversation about like lighting things in a way where it makes sense.
Yeah. And that first Nike shoot that you described, was that completely on your own, or were you working with stylists or assistants at that point?
We had a model maker actually build an insert into the shoe, and then I had an assistant. Actually, I don't even think I can't remember whether I had an assistant. They certainly didn't stay till 3 a.m. I think I was naive enough back then that I thought I could just smash it out and get it done.
Yeah.
But subsequently, after that, it was made much more sense to either get a stylist involved and get assistants involved as well.
Yeah, because now I think there's your current work seems to have quite strong collaborations with stylists or designers. So how valuable have you learned that collaboration process is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're always able to. Different people will bring different things to your project, and because you've got different creative minds, and everyone's got like a different visual image of or visual idea of how they see the picture coming together. So it's always it's really good having a collaborative effort. I think when you shoot a lot on your own, it can be a little bit it can stagnate a little bit after a while. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And how do you balance the commercial side of things with personal projects as well? How important is the personal work for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always struggle to shoot personal work, and I know it is really, really important to do. I definitely don't do enough of it. I think nowadays, like a lot of your commercial projects are, they're a little bit fixed. They're a little bit more fixed and harder to be very creative with them, or at least the projects that I work on are. At the end of the day, you've got a client who you're trying to keep happy, and sometimes what's in your mind, what you would think you would do creatively, doesn't always sit with them. But I think it depends on the commercial project, because obviously some commercial projects are set up for, the client might see someone, or the agency might see some work in your portfolio that they really like, and they'll gravitate towards that and let you do your thing. But there's other stuff which comes in, and it's a very specific brief, and so you kind of just you set it up according to how they want it. Whereas if you're able to do more of your own creative projects, you can be your own boss, and make the picture exactly how you want it, and no one's going to come back and sort of go, oh, I don't like this, or I don't like that. So yeah, I think that's really important to maintain some level of personal work and creativity.
And is that personal stuff all generally still life as well, or is there kind of other stuff that?
Yeah, at the moment it's mostly still life based or food based.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it would be nice to get back out in the field a little bit. It's a little bit harder at the moment because I've got a young son, and it's kind of, I feel like I want to be home at a reasonable hour to put him to bed and to bathe him and stuff. So at the moment that's kind of more still life based, but later on, it'd be great to venture out and do other things as well.
Yeah. In an ideal world, or when it gets to that stage, is there anything kind of cooking underneath that you are kind of aware that you'd like to explore?
Not really at this point. I guess it just comes down to, as you shoot more personal stuff and start to figure out cool ways of photographing things, and I guess that develops ideas, and it develops into other projects on the back of that. So I've got nothing specific in mind at the moment, but I'm always on the lookout for new and interesting things.
Sure. And in looking at the equipment side of things, when you kind of talked about the transition from film to digital, and when you fully adopted digital, was it always medium format? Did you touch on the smaller format stuff at all?
No. So I started first digital camera I used professionally was probably a 5D Mark II.
Mm-hmm.
And then prior to that, I had little point and shoot digital compact cameras. But yeah, the 5D Mark II was, I guess, a real turning point. And, because I had a full frame chip, I had a Canon system prior to that. I had a EOS 3. So it was like a logical step, because I could use the same lenses. So yeah, had a Mark II, and then moved to a Mark III, and then I had a Hasselblad at the time as well. And it wasn't until later that I got a P45 plus back. So then so I had side by side, had a Canon system and a Hasselblad system for medium format.
Mm-hmm. What was it about medium format that suited the stuff that you were doing? Was it all in the image quality itself, or was there something in the process that was well suited to your style of working?
Yeah, I guess it allows you to slow your photography down a little bit. But I mean, with still life, I guess it's the camera is usually set up on a tripod or camera stand. So in that respect, you're not always like a shutter monkey pressing the shutter button all the time. I guess it's had more to do with resolution, I suppose, and the lens quality I thought was quite good in Hasselblad lenses. And this was obviously on a V mount system, which probably the lenses date back to the 80s, I guess, 80s and 90s. So I still really enjoyed the look that I was getting from that system. But yeah, to be honest, I guess it depended on the shoot that I was doing. So, if it was like an editorial where I didn't want to spend that much time with it, I'd shoot that on 35 mil. But most sort of advertising projects I'd shoot on medium format for sure.
Yeah, and I guess was this kind of prior to a lot of output just going online? How much of your stuff is going to print, and how much is kind of more and more just ending up
Yeah,
on the
I
screen?
suppose. Yeah, I guess if we're talking about 5 years ago, the majority of the stuff was still maybe a bit more time actually, but the majority of the stuff was still going to print, magazine ads, things like that. But even nowadays, like even though things are really only going to appear on social media, sometimes it's nicer to shoot on medium format because there's more pixels and there's more information that you can retouch with and push those pixels around. So yeah, it is nice. It really depends on the project. It's I guess it's a toolbox. I don't feel that there's always one right camera for all photography. It really is sort of depends on what you're shooting.
Sure. And at what stage did you go down the route of opening up your own studio, and then from there, how much freedom you feel it offers you to have your own creative space that you can, is yours, and you can, what does it offer you in terms of what you can create?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I started getting more work, I moved into like a charity studio space, which was like the pretty cheap rent. I moved in with a couple of photographers, and as we shot more and more, we actually had this opportunity with the photographer I share the studios now with to buy a space. So we were really fortunate at that time. The price of the space wasn't too expensive, but we had to fit it out. It was actually really just concrete and rubble in there. So we had to do a complete fit out, which was quite expensive. So having your own space is fantastic, but sometimes you do find it quite limiting because it's a small studio. So it's fine for some projects, and then sometimes you want a bigger space to work in. So then you kind of have to sort of think about the logistics of it, and because your gear's there, you always want to shoot in that space.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you're renting spaces, you'd be free of that, and you just go, oh look, I need a 1,200 foot space. I'll go and rent that studio, or no, I just need like a little tabletop setup, so I'll just go to that studio. So you're not really confined to any space, and because you're always going to have to take your gear with you or rent your gear. Whereas sometimes I find having all my gear there, I'm a bit lazy and I just want to.
Okay, that's interesting. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, definitely. It's great having your own space and somewhere to work and be away from home, and then when you're done for the day, you can go back home and not think about it. But yeah, certainly at the same time, not being tied to any space gives you a bit of freedom as well.
And in terms of the style that you've created for yourself, how do you see that personally? How would you describe your style kind of across the projects that you shoot?
I guess it's kind of I would say like graphic and minimalist, I guess. And I think it probably stems from a little bit in the style that I was shooting that kind of style already before I got on board with Wired, but they sort of shot a lot in that kind of style, and GQ magazine as well. So I tended to like using sort of hard lights, because that hard light often, you could see a lot of detail in your products. Yeah, I guess that's kind of how I started stylistically, but that kind of lighting doesn't work with all subjects, so you kind of have to adapt. And when you look at a product, you can sort of see the surfaces and whether you're using a reflected light or a hard light to bring out the material of the product. Yeah, I guess you just have to look at it and see what's the best tool to use.
Do you see that kind of reflects you as a person and how you see the world as well?
Yeah, I think if I went back to when I was assisting that architectural photographer, I really loved how everything he shot was like straight lines and square. I was always when I looked at buildings or people photographing buildings, I'd always like go to line them up and see how square they were to the edge of page. And I guess that's how I started looking at the products that I was shooting, and trying to get them graphic as possible, and finding angles which showed a lot of detail and maintain those straight lines. And I guess when I look at things, I'm always walking around trying to find like the center point, or trying to find where a scene is nicely balanced. So I guess I don't consciously do it in day-to-day life, but I think when I'm walking around, like if I'm traveling and looking at things, I do sort of, it always comes back to me, and always kind of look at things in that sort of graphical sense.
As someone who is producing a lot of work for advertising, and whether it's print or online, you're producing stuff that has kind of quite a strong final output. And does that give you quite a satisfaction in knowing that the work is really has a purpose? And when it comes to balancing that with personal work as well, does that differ in it maybe not having the same
I think
end game?
Yeah, I think there's two different things. I think it's so much fun seeing your first billboard, or seeing your first ad in a published magazine or in the newspaper. I think you get a real kick out of that. And I think that was when my parents started to understand what it was that I did as a photographer. Because I think prior to that, like you tell them that, I'm taking photographs of this and that. But then, if they're driving down the road and you point something out to them, it's like, oh, that's my photograph. Then it was kind of easier for them to understand. So I think that's always like an interesting part of your, of seeing your work published, whether that's editorial or commercially. But I mean, your personal work, obviously you can also publish that and show it in a gallery space as well. And I think that's equally as good as well, in a different sense. I sense, it's quite a boost to the ego. And
Sure.
I think when we see, I guess we regularly see pictures mostly on our screens. These days you don't really see that much imagery being printed, especially my own work.
Yeah. So
I think, it's nice when you can find something that, you really like, and, you do a print of it. And it's also nice when, I've had friends or random people email me saying, oh, look, I really like that photo of, a stack of fruit, can I have a print? And that's really lovely to know that someone, would hang that on their wall.
Have you ever gone down the route of exhibiting, in a more, not necessarily a fine art context, but, taking it into a gallery space?
No, unfortunately, no, most of my work has been sort of commercially driven, but it's definitely something that in the future that would be nice to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, son, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. But,
thanks very much for having me.
All the best, dude. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.